Hi there, I'm Ismail Masoodi, and with my partner, Chase Gustafson, we will be covering Unit 1
of the AP World History curriculum.
Developments in East Asia. After replacing the Tang dynasty in China, the Song dynasty ruled from 960 to 1279 and was an example of the innovation within Afro-Eurasia, with its Neo-Confucian teachings, intellectual teachings, manufacturing capability, and Confucianism and Buddhism. China's strength was drawn from many factors like the imperial bureaucracy that appointed officials who carried out the empire's policies that have been in the government since the Qin, representing a continuity across centuries. Another factor is the civil service exam, one of Emperor Song Taizu's greatest achievements, leading to anyone being able to get a highly desired job, and also an example of the meritocracy that China became. Due to the Tang setting a flourishing agricultural development road and canal systems, the Song flourished. The Grand Canal's expansion enabled more trading to the world. Gunpowder in China was already invented, but the Song made the first guns, which were able to be spread via Silk Roads. Champa rice became popular due to its fast ripening and drought-resistant properties. With China's discovery of coal in the 4th century, it enabled China to have the manufacturing capability in the world, although the use of coal-powered machines wouldn't happen until the 18th century. China also experienced proto-industrialization, a set of economic changes in which people in rural areas made more goods that they could sell. China used the compass in maritime navigation and made innovation on ships which propelled China to become the most commercialized society with change economy from local consumption to market production. More sources of promoting growth in China was taxes and the tribute system, which acted as sources of income. The tributary system cemented China's power over several countries. By the Song dynasty, Korea, Japan, and kingdoms throughout Southeast Asia were tributary states. During this period of productivity, urban areas grew instead of the majority of people living in rural areas. The largest cities were Chang'an, Hangzhou, Guangzhou, China's class structure represented a significant shift as they grew more complex. The scholar gentry, which were people who were educated in Confucian and philosophy, soon outnumbered the aristocracy. Below the scholar gentry were farmers, artisans, and merchants. Underneath them were peasants and the urban poor. Women were respected in Confucianism, but expected to be different from men. The practice of foot binding became more common, where girls wrapped their feet so tightly that bones didn't grow naturally. Foot binding was later banned in 1912. Wood blocking printing was developed in the 7th century, which led to the rise of paper and literacy. Well-rounded schooling resulted in scholar bureaucrats, also known as Renaissance men. Buddhism came to
Buddhism came to China via Silk Roads from India. 3 types appeared initially, such as Theravada Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, and Tibetan Buddhism. It was introduced relating the beliefs to Chinese Taoism, which eventually fused together, creating Zen Buddhism. The Song dynasty was friendly with Buddhism, but did not promote it. Instead, the ideas of filial piety and Neo-Confucianism evolved between 770 to 840. The new incarnation emphasized ethics and became popular in Japan, Korea, and Vietnam.
Now, let us shift our focus to other countries like Japan. Japan's Prince Shotoku Tayashi promoted Buddhism and Confucianism. They also learned woodblock printing from China. During the Heian period 794 to 1185, Japan emulated many Chinese politics, art, and literature. Japan, for hundreds of years, was a feudal society without a centralized government, similar to European feudalism. Land-owning aristocrats battled for land and were more powerful in reality than the shogunate himself. Samurais had a strict code of honor called Bushido, similar to the code of chivalry in Europe. Now looking over to Korea, which had a tributary relationship, thus emulating many aspects of China. Koreans adopted beliefs, culture, and writing systems, although in the 15th century, the writing system would develop its own. The aristocracy was very powerful in Korea and prevented Chinese reforms. Lastly, taking a meander over Vietnam, who was culture diverse from China in a variety of ways. Vietnamese women enjoyed more independence, preferred nuclear families, which was more tight-knit families, and had a merit-based bureaucracy, which didn't function like China, instead having scholar officials that owed its allegiance to the peasants. The rejection of the system of foot binding and polygamy was also present. The Tang dynasty crumbled and Vietnam pushed China out of Korea.
Topic 1, Subunit 2, Developments in Dar al-Islam. After Muhammad died in 632, Islam spread rapidly outward from Arabia. Through the use of military and activities from merchants and missionaries, Islam's reach extended from India to Spain. Islamic leaders showed tolerance to Christians, Jews, and others who believed in a single God and did good works. Arabs often purchased enslaved people, or Mamluks, who frequently were ethnic Turks from Central Asia, to serve as soldiers and later as bureaucrats. Because of their roles, Mamluks had more opportunities for advancement than most enslaved people. In Egypt, Mamluks seized control of the government, establishing the Mamluk Sultanate 1250 to 1517. Another challenge to the Abbasids came from Central Asian Seljuk Turks, who were also Muslims. Starting in the 11th century, they began conquering parts of the Middle East, eventually extending their power almost as far east as western China. The Seljuk leader called himself Sultan, thereby reducing the role of the highest-ranking Abbasid from caliph to chief Sunni religious authority. The Abbasids allowed Christians to travel easily to and from their holy sites and around Jerusalem. However, the Seljuk Turks limited this travel. European Christians organized groups of soldiers called crusaders to reopen access. The Mongols were the fourth group to attack the Abbasid Empire, and they were among the most famous conquerors in history. The Mongols conquered the remaining Abbasid Empire in 1258 and ended the Seljuk rule. They continued to push westward, but were stopped in Egypt by the Mamluks. Good ideas flowed from one region to another on trade routes controlled by the Abbasids. Many went through Baghdad. However, trade patterns slowly shifted to routes farther north. Baghdad lost its traditional place at the center of trade. It lost wealth and population. It could not afford to keep its canals repaired. Farmers could not provide enough food for the urban population. Slowly, the infrastructure that had made Baghdad a great city fell into decay. Over time, the Islamic world fragmented politically. Many of these new states adopted Abbasid practices, but they were often distinct ethnically. The Abbasid Caliphate was led by Arabs and Persians. but later Islamic states were shaped by Turkic peoples who descended from people in Central Asia. For example, the Mamluks in North Africa, the Seljuks in Middle East, and the Delhi Sultanate in South Asia were all at least partially Turkic. By the 16th century, three large Islamic states had their roots in Turkic cultures: the Ottoman Empire and Turkey, the Safavid Empire in Persia, and the Mughal Empire in India. By learning from many cultures, Islamic scholars carried on the work of earlier thinkers. For example, they translated Greek literary classics into Arabic, saving the works of Aristotle and other Greek thinkers from oblivion. They studied mathematics texts from India and transferred the knowledge to Europeans, and they adopted techniques for paper making from China. Through them, Europeans learned how to make paper. In addition to building on intellectual achievements of other cultures, scholars during the Golden Age in Baghdad made their own achievements. Nasir al-Din al-Tusi, 1201 to 1274, was one of the most celebrated Islamic scholars. He contributed to astronomy, law, logic, ethics, mathematics, philosophy, and medicine, and observatory bill under his direction was most advanced in the world and produced the most astronomical charts. Sufi poet and mystic Aisha al-Ba'uniya, 1470 to 1507, may be the most prolific female Muslim writer before the 20th century. Her best-known work, a long poem honoring Muhammad, called Clear Inspiration on Praise of the Trusted One, refers to many previous poets, reflecting her broad learning. Many of her works describe her journey towards mythical illumination. Her poetry reflects a contrast between most Muslims and Sufis. Unlike Muslims who focus on intellectual pursuits, such as the study of the Quran, Sufis emphasize introspection to grasp truths that they could not be understood through learning. Sufism may have begun as a mystical response to the perceived love of luxury by the early Umayyad Caliphate. Islamic society viewed merchants as more prestigious than did other societies in Europe and Asia at the time. Muhammad himself had been a merchant, as had his first wife. With the revival of the trade on the Silk Roads, merchants could grow rich from their dealings across the Indian Ocean and Central Asia. They were esteemed as long as they maintained fair dealings and gave to charity and accord to the pillars of Islamic faith. Some merchants were even sent out as missionaries. Islam prohibited Muslims from enslaving other Muslims or monotheists such as Jews, Christians, and Zoroastrians. However, it permitted enslaving others from other religious groups. Muslims often imported enslaved people from Africa, people from present-day Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine, and then they would enslave people from Central Asia. But the institution of hereditary slavery had not developed. Many enslaved people converted to Islam, after which their owners freed them. Muhammad raised the status of women in several ways. He treated his wives with love and devotion. He insisted that dowries, the payments prospective husbands made to secure their brides, be paid to the future wife instead of the father. He forbade female infanticide, the killing of newborn girls. Muhammad's first wife was educated and had her own business, which set a pattern for recognitions of women's abilities. Overall, Islamic women enjoyed a higher status than Christian or Jewish women. Islamic women were allowed to inherit property and retain ownership after marriage. They could remarry if widowed, and they would receive a cash settlement if divorced. Under some conditions, a wife could initiate the divorce. Moreover, women could practice birth control. Islamic women who testified in the court under Sharia were to be protected from retaliation, but their testimony was worth only half of that of a man. One gap in the historical record is written evidence of how women viewed their position in society. Most of the records before 1450 were written by men. While Umayyads ruled only briefly in the Middle East, they kept power longer in Spain. In 711, after Muslim forces had defeated Byzantine armies across North Africa, they successfully invaded Spain from the south. They designated Cordoba as their capital for Spain. The Islamic military was turned back to 732 when a loss, the Battle of Tours against Frankish forces. This defeat, rare for Islamic armies in the 700s, marked the limit of rapid Islamic expansion into Western Europe. Most of the continent remained Christian, but Muslims ruled Spain for the next 7 centuries. These new rulers promoted trade, allowing Chinese and Southeast Asian products to enter into Spain and thus into the rest of Europe. Many of the goods in this trade traveled aboard ships called dhows. Dhows had long, thin hulls that made them excellent for carrying goods, though they were less useful for conducting warfare.
Topic 1, Subunit 3. Developments in South and Southeast Asia. South Asia was only occasionally united as a single state in history. However, Buddhism provided some cultural unity throughout the region. South India was more than stable than northern India, with its first kingdom reigning for over 400 years, the Chola dynasty, and the second kingdom, the Vijayanagara Empire, for 300 years. North India formed into Rajput kingdoms that later formed into present-day India and Pakistan. The Himalayas protected India from invasions from the north and east, but mountain passes allowed invasion by Muslim armies, and a century Islamic armies invaded Pakistan, located on the eastern fringes of Dar al-Islam, but Muslim conquerors' influences were limited. In the 13th century, Sumit forces managed to conquer the city of Delhi, bringing Islam into India. Some Hindus converted to Islam, while others resented Muslims, which were because they considered them foreigners. Another reason of this resentment was the imposed tax called the jizya on all non-Muslims in the empire. The Delhi Sultanate never organized an efficient bureaucracy like the Chinese. In 1526, the Sultanates lost power to the Mughals. Islam initially entered India forcefully, but wanted to unify as a religion and actively seek converts. Most came voluntarily, with many Muslim merchants going to the Indian Ocean trade and low-caste Hindus converting, hoping it would improve their social status. The arrival of Islam did little to alter the basic structure of society in Southeast and South Asia. Information was shared throughout Dar al-Islam, and the Arabic numerals actually originated in India. Many Islamic-styled buildings with their geometric patterns can be seen in the Delhi. One famous example in southern part of the city of Delhi, called the Qutub Minar, a testament to the influence of Islam in India. An entire new language was developed through the blending of Muslims and Indians called Urdu, which is now the official language of Pakistan. The Bhakti movement, beginning in the 12th century in South India, was emphasized focusing on developing a strong attachment to a particular deity, which is also similar to Sufi Muslims because they were both mystical movements. South Asia strongly influenced its neighbors like Indonesia, Malaysia, Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. Merchants sold gold, silver, metal goods, and textiles and brought back fine spices. Hinduism and Buddhism was introduced in these voyages. The region of Southwest Asia became a valuable region as whoever could influence and control that area could also influence that trade. Sea-based kingdoms emerged such as Sirajaya Empire and the Mahajit Kingdom. Other land-based kingdoms also during power, such as the Sinaloa dynasty in Sri Lanka, became a center of Buddhist study where monasteries and nunneries flourished. The Khmer Empire, also known as the Angkor Empire, was situated near the Mekong River and did not depend on maritime prowess.
Topic 1, Subunit 4, Development in the Americas. Following the decline of the Olmecs in Mesoamerica and the Chavan and the Andes, new salvation such as Mayans, the Aztecs, and Incas rose in those same regions. In the 700s in eastern United States, Mississippi, culture emerged. Enormous earth mounds were built, the largest of which are Cahokia. The Mississippi and society was a rigid class structure in which a chief called the Great Sun ruled each town below it. They were the upper class of priests, nobles, and the lower class of farmers, hunters, merchants, and our students at the bottom were slaves. It was a matrilineal society, which meant the social standing was determined by the woman's side of the family. People left Cahokia around 1450, and it is disagreed upon why they left. One theory proposes that flooding or other weathers led to crop failure and to the collapse of agricultural economy. After the Chaco and Mesa Verde culture appeared, well known for their innovations, both declined. The late 13th century is a climate became drier between 250 and 900 CE. Mayan stretch over Mexico and what is now Belize, Honduras, and Guatemala. The Mayan government was a city-state in which each king ruled a city and its surrounding territory. Most men, however, when no male heir was available or an old nothing governed, Mayan woman ruled. Tributes were paid to the conqueror, and captives were used as human sacrifices during religious ceremonies. Mayan kings were claimed to be descendants of the gods. What rule passed down from father to son? But some kings lost support and were sometimes overthrown. Taxes were paid in the form of crops and labor. Cities had no outstanding armies, so When they were erupted, governments required citizens to prove military service. The Mayans were innovative thinkers and incorporated the concept of zero into their number system. It developed a complex writing system and learned to make rubber out of liquid collected by rubber plants. Mayan science and religion were linked to astronomy, so as a result, keeping an accurate calendar was very important. Pyramids were the place of observations, such as Chichen Itza. Priests taxed to conduct ceremonies honoring the gods by offering these taxes to the gods. Now, let's look at the Aztecs, who were also known as the Mexicanas. Originally hunter-gatherers from the 1200s, they migrated to central Mexico. The capital city was known as Tenochtitlan, on an island in the middle of a swampy lake. It was one of the largest cities in the world at the time, and provided water through a network of aqueducts. A great pyramid stood at the center of the city, and floating gardens called chinapinas increased from a space for food production. Aztecs conquered much of Mesoamerica. They developed a tribute system and ensured their dominant people who conquered were forced to pay tribute. Sunderlands to perform military service. Tributes included practical goods such as food, cloth, and firewood, as well as feathers, beads, and jewelry. City-states or grouped into provinces with warriors and families moving to each province. Assets government was a theocracy, which is the rule by religious leaders. At the top of the social hierarchy, there was a great spirit speaker who represented the gods. Next were land-owning nobles. These people also formed a large majority of the Aztec military. Leadership scribes and healers, followed by the crest people and traders. Then below traders were peasants and soldiers, and at the bottom were enslaved people who were offered as sacrifices. Women played an point role as they wove cloth, which local rulers demanded as part of the regular tribute. By the late 15th century, the Aztec Empire was in decline because their low level of technology and lack of real devices and packing animals. To the empire expanded far too large for which they could reasonably govern, and that resentment of many tribes led to rebellion, which the Spaniards used against them when they arrived in 1519. Finally, let's look at Inca, which in 1438, a tribal leader who called himself Pachuqui began comparing tribes living now Cusco, Peru. His military victories led to small tribes which then formed into the Incan Empire. By splitting the empire into 4 provinces, which is with its own government and bureaucracy, the empire had a very efficient and extensive territory. Unlike the Aztecs, they conquered people. They did not have to pay tribute, but were instead subject to a mita system, or mandatory public service. The decline of the Incas came in 1532 with the arrival of the Spanish conquistador Francisco Pizarro. The Spanish conquered the core of the empire, which was in the middle of civil war. Other diseases introduced by the Europeans led to the decline.
Topic 1, Subunit 5, Developments in Europe. Ibn Battu's commentary on Mali society sheds light on the cultural forces at work in sub-Saharan Africa during the 14th century. A scholar from Morocco on the northwest coast of Africa, he was well versed in Islamic law, also known as Sharia. Islamic governments in Mogadishu, East Africa, and Delhi, India saw his advice and welcomed him to their lands. Even Battu's travelogue demonstrated how Islam's phenomenal growth increased connections among cultures of Asia, Africa, and Southern Europe. As Ibn Battu's accounts make clear, African societies that had adopted Islam kept many of their traditions. In contrast, most Asian or European societies, those in sub-Saharan Africa, did not centralize power under one lord or central government. Instead, communities formed based networks where families governed themselves. A male head of the network, a chief, mediated conflicts and dealt with neighboring groups. Groups of villages became districts, and groups of chiefs decided among themselves how to solve district problems. Sometime before 1000, in what is now Nigeria, people of the Hasha ethnic group formed 7 states, the Hydra Kingdoms. The states were loosely connected through kinship ties, though they had 2 that had no central authority. People established prospering city-states with a specialty. For example, several were situated in plains where cotton grew. Many Hasha benefited from thriving trans-Saharan trade, a network of trading routes across the Great Desert. The state on the western edge of the region specialized in military matters and defended the states against attack. Then there were Ghana, that was nestled between the Sahara and the tropical rainforests of the West African coast. The Kingdom of Ghana was not in the same location as the modern nation of Ghana. Historians believe that the kingdom had been founded during the 5th century, at least 2 centuries before the time of Muhammad, peace be upon him. But Ghana reached its peak of influence from the 8th to 11th centuries. Ghana's rulers sold gold and ivory to Muslim traders in exchange for salt, copper, cloth, and tools. From Ghana's capital city, Kombi Sale, the king ruled a centralized government aided by nobles and an army equipped with iron weapons. In sub-Saharan Africa, a strong central government ruling over large territories were uncommon. Instead, sub-Saharan Africa, because small communities were organized around several structures: kinship, age, and gender. Kinship connections allowed people to identify first as members of a clan or family. Age was another significant social marker. An 18-year-old could do more hard labor than a 60-year-old. But younger people often relied on the advice of their elders. Thus, communities divided work according to age, creating age grades or age sets. Finally, gender had an influential role in social organization. Slavery had a long history in Africa. Prisoners of war, debtors, and criminals were often enslaved. Most men and some women did agricultural work. Most women and some men served in households. In many kinship-based societies, people could not own land privately, but they could own other people. Owning a large number of enslaved people increased one's social status. Strong demand in the Middle East for enslaved workers resulted in the Indian Ocean slave trade between East Asia and the Middle East. This trade started several centuries before the Atlantic Ocean slave trade between West Africa and the Americas. In some places, it lasted into the 20th century. These enslaved East Africans provided valuable labor on sugar plantations in Mesopotamia. However, between 869 and 883, many Arab workers mounted a series of revolts known as the Zunj Rebellion. About 1,500 enslaved people successfully captured the city of Basra and held it for 10 years before being defeated. The large size and long length of the time before it was defeated made the Zanj Rebellion one of the most successful slave revolts in history. Literature as it existed in sub-Saharan Africa was oral, or storytellers were the conduits of history for a community. Griots possessed encyclopedic knowledge of family lineages and the lives and deeds of great leaders. In general, griots were also adept at music, singing their stories and accompanying themselves on instruments such as the drums of a 12-string harp known as the kora. Just men served as griots, women served as grioettes. They would sing at special occasions such as weddings. They provided women with a sense of empowerment in a patriarchal society.
Unit 1, Subunit 6, Developments in Europe. As the Roman Empire declined in power in the 5th and 6th centuries, Western Europe entered the Middle Ages, sometimes called the medieval period. Throughout Europe, trade declined, intellectual life receded, and the united Roman state was replaced by smaller kingdoms that frequently fought one another for control of territory. In response to European kings, lords and peasants work out agreements to provide for common defense. Only the Roman Catholic Church remained powerful in most of Europe from Roman times to the 16th century. European civilization in the Middle Ages was characterized by a decentralized political organization based on a system of exchanges of land for loyalty known as feudalism. Lacking a strong government, people needed some protection from bandits, lords, and invaders, such as Vikings from Northern Europe. Some examples of these were the monarchs that the king gave land to, then the lords would get the land from the kings. Then the king would give land to the knights. In return, the knights would protect the land, and then the peasants would live and be protected on the land in return for crops and livestock. They were forced to obey the Lord's orders. Large areas of land or estates were also referred to as manors. The manorial system provided economic self-sufficiency and defense. The manor produced everything that people living in it required to live, limiting the need to trade or contact outsiders. Many serfs spent their entire lives on a single manor, little aware of events in the rest of Europe. As both climate and technology slowly improved, the amount of arable or farmable land gradually increased. Agricultural became more efficient near the end of the Middle Ages. The three-field system, in which crops were rotated through 3 fields, came into use. The three-field system is when 2 fields were planted, one with food and the second with legumes, such as peas or beans. This made the soil more fertile, and the third field was unused for the year. In France, the clergy and nobility felt little responsibility to protect a government that they were not financing, a problem that continued to increase in France up until the day before the French Revolution in 1789. In the Holy Roman Empire, there was a dispute going on in the 11th and 12th centuries of whether they should have a secular leader, which means non-religious, rather than the Pope. It was eventually resolved in the Concord of Worms in 1122, when the Church achieved autonomy from secular authorities. The empire came to a formal end when the French leader Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Central Europe in 1806. Many English nobles objected the power of William and the succeeding Norman monarchs. These nobles forced limits on that power. In 1215, they forced King John to sign Magna Carta, which required the king to respect certain rights, such as the right to a jury trial, before a noble could be sentenced to prison. They also won the right to be consulted on the issue of Scottish, which is a tax paid on a knight who wanted to pay money instead of provide military service. Finally, the first English Parliament was formed in 1265. These developments increased the rights of the English nobility, but not of the general population. Between 1337 and 1453, the rival monarchies of England and France fought a series of battles known as the 100 Years' War to end the conflict. Of English retained only a part of Calais in France. Two other important results of the war are how people saw themselves and how they fought. There was a sense of unity among the soldiers who did not speak the same language when they worked together to fight the opposition. The war also demonstrated the spreading use of gunpowder weapons. Gunpowder had been invented by the Chinese and spread west by the Mongols. In 1054, the Christian church in Europe divided two branches, a split called the Great Schism. The Roman Catholic Church continued to dominate most of Europe for another 5 centuries, while the Orthodox Church was powerful for the East from Greece to Russia. The Renaissance was a period characterized by a revival of interest in classical Greek and Roman literature, art, culture, and civics virtue. Scholars recovered and studied decaying manuscripts that had been written many centuries earlier. Developed in 1439, Johannes Gutenberg movable type printing press initiated a revolution in print technology. The printing press allowed manuscripts to be mass-produced at a relatively affordable cost. It fostered a growth in literacy and the rapid spread of ideas.
Topic 1, Subunit 7. Comparison in the period from 1200 to 1450. Between 1200 to 1450, states and core areas of civilization grew larger while smaller states declined. In Asia, the military strength of the Mongols created the largest land-based empire in history. In West Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia, the region of Islam was a very key part in state building. In Europe, trade, both internal and external, was influenced by the Middle East, which led to a greater impact. The Song dynasty in China continued a long period of technological and cultural progress. The Abbasid Caliphate in the Middle East was fragmented by invaders, which led to new Muslim states rising in Africa, the Middle East, and Spain. In South and Southeast Asia, the Chola Kingdom and the Vijayanagara Empire used trade and to build strong states. In Africa, the rulers of Mali created an empire of those bigger and more complex than the empire Ghana before it. The Americas' tributary empires, like the Aztecs, was formed in Mesoamerica. The Incan region used elaborate mita systems to support state building. Most of America's lacked centralized states. Europe had feudal ties, which declined as centralized states developed. Japan became more decentralized and more feudal across the globe. State building was backed by religion to have unite diverse populations and control the territory politically. In China and East Asia, Confucian belief systems was closely tied to civil service, in which the Song dynasty or Confucian scholars used to run a powerful, enduring bureaucracy. Neo-Confucianism spread to Korea and Japan, allowing rulers to justify and consolidate their power. In Europe, the Roman Catholic Church in the building was different than most of Eurasia. The church provided an alternate structure for organizing society. The church sometimes became a rival of those powerful states. The diffusion of religion was prominently seen over wide areas like Islam, Buddhism, and Christianity. Cross-cultural exchanges of technology innovation led to the increased trade, helped state building. Nomadic people played a key role in the process of state building, as well as the Mongols, that were a pastoral people, which then led to the Mongol Empire, allowing trade to Asia to expand. Turkish people to also increase their dominance over large land-based empires in the east. The Seljuk and Ottoman Turks became dominant forces in the Mediterranean region. The role of nomads later diminished and replaced by organized groups of merchants and trading companies. Socialized organization remained patriarchal in most cultures. However, they varied